Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Gen Z Unfiltered. This week, we've got a really interesting topic for you. We're going to be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the mental health of students and teenagers. And today, we've got two special guests from the same leadership team, Raveen and Anmol, to enlighten us on this topic. Please, let's welcome them. Hi, Raveen. Hi, Anmol.
Hi, Amreet.
Hi, Amreet. Thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you for joining me.
I'm really excited to talk to you about this.
Me too. All right, let's get started. Just before we dive into the questions, I would like to know a little bit about you guys. So, Anmol, please tell us about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So I know Amreet through SAYMH. I'm on the same leadership team. So SAYMH is South Asian Youth Mental Health Calgary. It's a youth-led organization, and what we try to do is try to ignite conversation about mental health in the South Asian community and just bring different South Asian communities together to further that conversation about mental health. I'm also a Master's of Counseling student, so that's where my educational background is. But I'm really involved and really passionate about mental health, and I love it. Love seeing youth like Amreet being passionate about this and advocating for mental health as well. So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks, Amreet.
Thank you, Anmol. Raveen?
Hi, my name is Raveen. I am, as like Anmol said, I'm part of the South Asian Youth Mental Health Leadership Team. So I help coordinate the program. And in terms of my background, I recently graduated from medical school at the University of Calgary, and I will be starting my residency in psychiatry. So I think this is a really topical issue, especially I think COVID has really impacted not only like our physical health, but we're seeing a lot of ramifications on our mental health. So I'm really looking forward to talking a little bit more about this today.
Thank you. So, Raveen, as you mentioned, we keep hearing that the mental health of adolescents, especially, has been impacted by COVID-19, mostly in a negative way. Are there some examples or evidence that you can share with us? And what signs should we be looking for in our loved ones to help them out?
Yeah, definitely. And I think Anmol and I are both just going to go back to back on answering some of these questions. But I think we could probably think just going from our personal experiences about how we have all approached mental health. I think it's been really hard for all. There's been a lot of uncertainty and unpredictability with COVID. And I think we're all really used to, I think what brings us a lot of stability and security is knowing and having a routine and knowing what to expect. So I think with COVID, that's made that really challenging. In my own personal experience and work, I remember when I was working at the Children's Hospital in the emergency department, and the amount of patients that had come in related to mental health concerns, whether that be like suicide, depression, anxiety, had increased substantially. And not only that, but they're actually seeing a lot of children who are being admitted on pediatric units because of the sequelae of COVID. Not only when we're looking at we see MISC-C, which is the child version of what COVID is. But we're also seeing those mental health ramifications. Actually, a lot more of patients are being admitted because of their mental health concerns. So I think just from like more of that serious element, there is definitely a greater number of people being admitted into hospital for mental health concerns. But I think even from a day-to-day experience, and I think Amreet, you probably know a lot more about this, being that you are a student yourself and seeing how that's impacted your own colleagues and yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I would have to agree. I think the impact on mental health has increased with COVID-19 than it was ever before. And personally, as a student, I've had that experience with unpredictability and not having a routine and not knowing what's going to happen in the future. So I can for sure say that, yeah, it's been difficult, but I really hope going forward that everything will get better. So many students grow up wanting to celebrate their graduation, but as we all know, this year, that opportunity has been taken away from many high school and university students. And how do you process and cope with such situations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, it is for a lot of people, like COVID has like disrupted what was typical for them, like what they would have expected, right? And for a lot of people, like going to university or even high school, right? It's such an important part of their life. It's exciting, it's all about like making friendships and like deciding what they want to do with their future, for example. So things like graduation, prom, right? They're really big milestones that, yeah, like a lot of people are celebrating in ways that they didn't think they would have to celebrate, right? So I think it's important to still have those celebrations. I know it's not as people might have expected it, right? So graduation might be virtual, or they might be, prom might not be such a grand celebration, right? So there might not be like the whole ballroom dance or that. The party, for example, right? But I think it's still important to have those celebrations and celebrate in your own way, right? So whether that's like celebrating with your family or close friends, if you're there are still exceptions for outdoor gatherings. I think it's the limit is 5 right now in Calgary, right? So if you're doing like socially distant celebrations, right? Of course, like it's not recommended that people get together, but if you're being safe, you're taking all the precautions, and of course the other possibility is to do a virtual celebration, right? But I can understand that this is a very special occasion, so having some sort of celebration to keep that normalcy is important. So celebrating in what way makes sense for you, and coming up with something that makes you excited about celebrating this huge step is important. Yeah.
And I'm just gonna add on to what Anmol said. So actually, I'm not maybe like a high school student, but I did recently just graduate from medical school, and so not having that opportunity to have a graduation, like it's quite hard. I think you do. Spend a lot of your time, I think, in school, working really hard every day. And I think at the end of the day, it's really nice to, like Anmol said, to have that celebratory effect. So I found like it to be very anticlimactic in many ways, to kind of be wrapping up one part of your journey and moving on to the next. But I would agree with Anmol. I think it's important that we still do maybe try to in some way add back some normalcy. And so I think I really appreciate that universities still having virtual graduations, and trying to use, there's a lot of different platforms that exist right now, not just Zoom, but different platforms that, have tried to kind of simulate that experience of, being able to talk in groups and whatnot. So to just be able to somewhat allow us to still have some of those experiences, even though I think it's really hard not to, having the exact same thing as like a one-to-one moment, or being able to take pictures and just create some of those memories. But I think we are adapting the best we can.
Yeah. And also, I think it's really important to kind of keep in mind that if you're not you're not able to have those celebrations right now, like in the future, I think it's still important to celebrate it, even though like you're looking back at it and celebrating like a past event. I think it's still the same, right? You're still celebrating something that happened, and still kind of giving it creating those memories that you wanted to create in that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I would have to agree. Again, it's not the ideal as what we would have done normally, but it's pretty cool to think that we have this opportunity to celebrate in our own little ways, however we want. And so I think that's really cool. But going back to the impacts of the pandemic, can you please share a little bit about the social and academic impacts, like things like missing a yearbook or not doing extracurricular activities? How has all of this impacted students in the last year?
Mm-hmm. So I could start with that. I think, and like I said, once again, Amreet, you're probably the best to actually talk about this, being a student yourself and having had that firsthand lived experience. But just kind of from what we know, like school is, one part of school that we go to is definitely academic learning, but a large part of it is also that social interaction that you have. And I think not being able to have that, I think really can be really challenging. I think for many students, it can be really isolating, can cause them to feel lonely, unmotivated, did, and maybe kind of discouraged without that regular social interaction. So I think, there is one element part to that. And I think another thing, like, I think just to think about school more broadly from a systemic point of view, I think school is in many ways can be potentially like a safe place for people to come to. Potentially, like, maybe home is not a safe environment for you, and being able to have that opportunity to go to school and to do part of an extracurriculars. When we think about it, not everybody comes from the same like social status. Not a lot of families maybe can afford to have, send their children to, extracurricular activities or different things that I think have made it more challenging during COVID versus whether if you're at school, we know there's like lunchtime activities, there's after school activities, there's activities embedded in school. And I think this allows almost like kind of a way that we can make sure that students are getting more equitable access as we can to like different opportunities. And I think that is reduced with the online learning. So I think there's an element, but on the flip side, if you think about it, being at home can also be positive for many students as well. Not all social interactions are positive interactions. There's people face bullying at school. So maybe being at home is actually a safer place for them. And they don't have to worry about, those social interactions. Some people really struggle with anxiety. So I actually had one of the doctors that I was working with was actually telling us about how some of his patients that have, generalized anxiety disorder or agoraphobia, actually they're like doing a lot better right now with COVID, because it's more socially acceptable to not be talking to people or not be interacting with people all the time, or keeping your distance from people. So people who maybe worry about hygiene a lot, and that's a stressor for them. Now everybody around them is also like worried about hygiene, and they try to keep their space from other people. So in many ways it could also be really normalizing for them to feel like now everybody is kind of feeling the way that they've always felt in terms of that anxiety. So I think everybody's experience with this online learning is going to be really different depending on your social circumstances and personal circumstances.
The effect of like online learning, right? I know working with students who have had to transition to online learning from in-person learning, I know it also depends on their learning styles, right? Mm-hmm. So some people, they really benefit from being in an environment like home, which is a little bit more controlled. For example, like Raveen mentioned, it lessens their anxiety, right? When they are in a more comfortable environment in which they feel safer in, right? There's also students with disabilities who might have been having extra support at school in person, and that support isn't available online, right? So again, it makes it a little bit more challenging. In terms of mental health and specifically like academics, right? We know that they're very linked because when we talk about chronic stress, so stress can be induced by a lot of different things, right? And the pandemic definitely has brought up stress levels for a lot of people. So chronic stress, we know that it can change the chemical and physical structure of the brain, right? So that can have a direct impact on our cognitive skills. So things like attention, concentration, memory, and even creativity, right? So that directly impacts how we might be doing in school. And even emotional regulation, right? As you respond to stress, this is going to have an impact on the way you regulate your emotions. And all of these things kind of combined together, they're going to predict and have an impact on your studies. And not just your studies, like you said, your social activities as well. So again, it's just to kind of keep in mind that like it's there's a lot of different factors here at play. And for a lot of people, like one factor might be more have a greater impact than another one, right? So again, yeah, it's for, like Raveen said, so for some people, home can be a very safe place where they, might even like reach their potential a little bit faster or earlier, right? But for other people, it can be a hindrance. So again, it's like very individual and kind of keeping in mind that like what's going on for that specific person and so the effect of COVID on and online learning, it's going to vary for a lot of people. And I think a lot of research has been coming out about students and the effect on learning that COVID has had. But I think the long-term impacts, I think a lot of people, we don't know enough about, right? So it'll be like those years down the road that we'll kind of realize like this is the effect that COVID has had. We know like the immediate effects, but again, right, like the long-term impact that it's going to have, we're going to learn about it a little bit more slowly than we think. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
I think another thing that is worth, I think, talking about is, I think with COVID, we've seen a lot of, with the constantly changing restrictions, we've seen people having to move from, in-person learning to remote learning and back to in-person learning. And I think that can be really challenging as well, not having that stable, steady routine. And I think like Anmol brought up so many great points. Like we all have really different learning styles, and each time like you have that disruption, you have to learn a new learning style. And there is inconsistency. So from a student perspective, I can imagine that's very difficult. And then from that perspective of teachers, it's also challenging too. Like they're learning a whole new format of education. I'd say most people aren't very familiar with how to engage their students through online platforms. I know from my perspective, like being a medical student, a lot of our education was also moved online. And you can imagine that it's very challenging when you're not able to like simulate certain things, or to be able to have that same one-on-one discussion period. It's hard to replicate that online. So I think even for teachers, that that can affect their mental health and well-being too, not just having to constantly reinvent the wheel essentially for themselves, and try to come up with new ways that they can really engage with their students.
Yeah, so talking about all these different factors and how online learning impacts students, what do you think of online learning being retained as a medium for instruction for kindergarten to grade 12 and university? Would you say it's overall positive or negative?
So I think, this is like, it's a complex question, because I think one part is that we have to look at what the public health implications of COVID and why we have moved to remote learning, is really to minimize that spread of COVID, and the fact that like if you were able to, if you got the virus and you were to get sick and to pass it on, and already right now we're seeing in Alberta like our hospitals are being overwhelmed, or I mean luckily now with the vaccine we're seeing a reduction in the daily new cases and active caseload, but I think initially like that was a huge concern. And if you even think about it, like with children being at school, like I remember talking to some children who were saying that like, and parents talking about how challenging it was for their kids because maybe one person in their class got COVID, and now it's like their entire class needs to self-isolate for 2 weeks. So yeah, there's a benefit to that because you are trying to reduce that spread, and not making sure that we're having less people get sick. But then on the other aspect is that, as we've been talking about, the mental health developmental implications of COVID and online learning. So yeah, it's definitely a really challenging question. And I think that's why we are not necessarily seeing like a consistent approach to this, throughout the world. Everybody is kind of doing this differently, and our province is doing it very differently too.
Yeah. And if I can just add, I think Raveen brought up like a really good point about like the systemic nature of like education and looking at it from like a systemic lens, right? I think it's so important to, when we talk about education, to consider each student individually, because that's what's going to create like the best learning environment for them. And so again, like I said, for some people, like online learning is very beneficial, right? It helps them reach their potential, but for others it's not as beneficial, and it's can be detrimental to their learning and their achievement, right? So again, kind of keeping in mind like the individual factors, I think it would be great if it's offered to those who prefer learning like that, or they have those barriers in which that prevents them from going in person, or like that could be like mental health, it could be structural, so it could be financial, it could be transportation, anything like that, right? It can be really helpful for them. But again, kind of like assessing on an individual basis whether or not this would be a good fit for someone. It's a good opportunity to kind of figure out like who this might be a good fit for and who it might not be, because there's been a little bit of exposure, so people are a little bit familiar with remote and online learning now, so it puts them in like a better position to make that informed decision. But again, like having that choice and option, I think that is really important moving forward, because again, like it's we've been shown even by like some families, who are able to offer better support at home for their children, or for people with disabilities, for example, right? So yeah, it's again, take it on an individual basis and assess their needs and deliver that education. I think that would be the most important way to kind of move forward from this, if we can learn something from this, for sure.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So, Raveen, you mentioned that some parents have said that it's been challenging for their children to adapt to online learning. And Anmol, you said it's important to assess each student's individual needs. So, some students, kids especially, and high school students have been having breakdowns. They've been crying, and for some reason, they don't know why. So is there any reason or example that this might be happening?
I think that is a really good question. I think it would be unfair to kind of generalize to a lot of the children and the kids, just because, depending on their like certain circumstances, maybe there could be mental health concerns, there could be like familial problems that they are dealing with, or just stress overall, right? And related to online learning, they could be missing the interactions with their peers and their teachers, or just that like normal school interactions, right? So it could be a combination of these factors as well. But I think the thing that might be a common factor between them is just that there is a lot of stress. There has been an increase in mental health concerns, and it doesn't have to be like a mental illness, right? Everyone experiences on a spectrum their mental health. So if we think about like good mental well-being and poor mental well-being, right? So when we get pushed towards like the poor mental well-being, you're more likely to have trouble regulating your emotions and coping with stressors day to day. So that could be when kids, start to break down, when they aren't able to cope with what is going on in their life, right? It could be things are becoming too overwhelming, and maybe they're not having that same support that they're used to. For a lot of people, school does offer a lot of support that they don't have access to at home, right? So that could be like mental health counselors, nurses, teachers, peers, and even like principals, right? They're able to offer that support. So the lack of that support can sometimes increase that stress and push them again towards that like poor mental well-being.
Mm-hmm. And I think, like Anmol said, and like the question that you brought up, like whether people are having breakdowns or crying, and not also, I think sometimes you do need somebody to recognize that this person isn't acting the way that they normally act, or just to be able to recognize that something is maybe off for this person. And if you're at home and you're isolated, and over like Zoom communication, it's a lot harder to gauge those emotional changes, and maybe to be able to reach out to someone and be like, hey, like, you don't seem like yourself today. Like, is everything okay? Like, how are things going? So I think that might be more challenging and maybe more difficult to start some of those, like maybe more natural conversations that would have come up otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And, you mentioned it earlier, Amreet, like what are some signs and things that we can look for when we're supporting our friends and family, right? So this is some of those things. So when someone starts to see changes, so these can be like small changes, right? So feeling off about their thoughts, feelings, or behavior, friends, family, peers, teachers, they're more likely to pick up even on these small changes, right? And knowing about some of these like warning signs can help with like taking action earlier. So some of these warning signs could be like what you said, right? So trouble regulating emotions. So that could present as crying, right? It could be for younger kids, it could be meltdowns or tantrums, right? For other people, it could be changes in sleep, appetite, again, changes in mood, trouble processing things or thinking, sensitivity. So these are just a few, right? And again, it's important to keep in mind that these signs alone, they don't predict mental illness by themselves at all. But it's important that if you see these signs that you consult a professional. It just warrants an assessment from someone who is familiar with the mental health of like that specific demographics, and they can ask those like specific questions that would help them assess if there is something going on here that would need further intervention.
And I think another case, so in terms of a worried parent or family member, there are a number of resources that you can access. So I think one resource that I really like is Connect Teen. It's through the Distress Center, and so I have their phone number here. So it's 587-333-2724. And what Connect Teen is, it's run through the Distress Center. And you can essentially, teens, children can text this number just to be able to talk to somebody about what the concerns are going. So it's just a very like a one-on-one peer support program that exists, and it's run, the other people on the other line are as well, or other teens and youth. So if children feel that they don't have someone to talk to, or they feel like there's a lot going on in their life that they could really benefit from talking to like a near peer, that's a really great resource. I think, like Anmol said, like there is a broad spectrum of what can be not being well, to like what we do move on to maybe having a mental illness and impacting their mental health. And so someone who comes from the world of mental illness, it sees a lot of that. I think it is really valuable to go and talk to your doctor, and to have that relationship with your family doctor, because I think a lot of family doctors are really great at being able to manage mental health. So, if you're noticing, a prolonged change in someone's mood, and we would say like that's something that's lasting more than a 2-week period, then I think it is really good to go talk to your doctor and to initiate that start of that conversation. A lot of clinics may also have access to psychologists as well. And your doctor might also be able to refer you to maybe counseling resources if you think that's appropriate for your child. So another great resource is 211. So you can call 211, and that anywhere in Alberta, and that you can ask for information on different counseling resources that potentially, or different programs that you can connect children with. So if that's something that you'd like to do, that's a good option as well.
Thank you. So along with these resources, is there anything that parents can do at home to help their children if they see these signs, maybe something smaller?
Yeah, I think obviously I think the first best thing to do is to start that conversation. And I think when we come from, and I'm thinking about coming from someone who comes from a South Asian background, I know, and generally, I think sometimes mental health is a difficult subject to breach. So just really going up to your child and asking them like how they're doing, and just keeping that like a broad and open-ended question. And I think often like children, might not feel the most comfortable talking to their parents. So it might even be valuable to, connect with a friend, a friend that of theirs, and be like, hey, like, have you noticed that like, Tim isn't feeling the same way that they usually are? Like, have you been able to reach out to them? And often like, I have seen that children like, their friends themselves will reach out to their friends' parents to be like, I don't think this person is okay right now. Like, can you check in on them? So really relying on those, like maybe the people who do maybe converse with your children a little bit more, they're interacting with them a little more and checking in with them. And, with this aspect of things being moved online and being more remote, like I think another thing to factor in is that children are having a lot more exposure to social media. And so, there's, I think, inherent dangers related to social media as well, in terms of just like the type of people that you're able to communicate and interact with. So we have this like new element of maybe cyberbullying that as a parent might not be so obvious, and you might not be able to notice that. So I think really being able to talk to maybe your children's friends and seeking their support and advice if you're not able to have that easy discussion with your own children.
Yeah, and I think like just starting that like open conversation so that like your kids feel comfortable enough to come to you and be like, hey, I'm not doing too good. I need some help, right? Earlier, like stereotypically, you might think that like, if you weren't having a good day and you wanted to skip a day of school, you'd be like, my stomach's hurting or I'm not feeling too good and I need to skip school today. Everything being like online, people don't have that option, right? Because then they're still expected to attend their online classes. But I think if like, your child comes to you and they're saying that they're not feeling too good or like they're acting or their behavior has changed in a way that suggests that they need a break, it's okay to take that break and come back, take that break, take care of themselves. And, if that's a day where they just kind of go and, they take the day off, like go outside, for example, go with their parents for like an outing or something, right? That's really important. And I think another thing to keep important for parents to keep in mind is that often when their kids are struggling with their mental health, what a lot of parents will do is they will take on that blame because they will feel that, like I wasn't able to support my kid properly, and this is why like this is happening, right? But again, it's just rather than kind of displacing or putting the responsibility on yourself or on the child, right? It's just important to make the child the focus and like helping them get the support that they need to get back to being more healthy is the good way to go, right? And just keep in mind that it's no one's fault. Mental health challenges, they happen children across all ages, right? So the fact that you're recognizing it and you're helping them get the support that they need is the best thing that you can do at that point.
And I think also things that we can do day to day, I think, is to create some level of routine for your children. So I think often, whether that be further study space, like I really recommend that you have a separate study space, then that's your bedroom, to have a space that's quiet, isolated, and that is your focus zone, like that's school, and like create different zones. So this is your school zone, and then to have a separate area that's your home zone. So you're creating that level of separation. So at home, you can chill, you can relax. So you're kind of not bringing that, that stress and anxiety that's related to school into your home life as well. Can be one thing. I think as well, like trying to incorporate physical activity. I think the more time that we spend online, I think really directly reduces the amount of physical activity. So whether that be like encouraging physical activity in what ways, going on regular walks, or there's a lot of like online workout videos that potentially you could also incorporate. So maybe try some of those things. I think even the things that like, regular things, outside of COVID, having that regular interaction with your child. So whether that being, hey, like maybe like, let's do like a baking activity today, or like let's cook, or let's play board games or cards or something together, so that you have that time to be able to connect with your children as well. And we say especially like with younger children, who this is like more in their formative years of development, like social interaction is very important. So being able to make sure that we're still engaging with children, I think is really important. And I think it's very challenging for parents as well. Often, like, parents are dealing with their own challenges related to COVID. But now, and often I think school in many ways is like a built-in daycare system for parents for when they're going to work, and being able to also have like their own time for themselves too. And so now we're not seeing that as much as well. Now with that, there is less division of, home life, work life. And it all, I think, is really making it really challenging for people to be able to create, I think, just time for just themselves as well.
Yeah, so today I learned that a lot of people, some people find it a good technique of learning to be at home, and some people don't. So for the people that don't, and the people that may be struggling right now, especially the students, how do we keep dreaming and remaining positive when everything seems so bleak?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that the pandemic has shown us is that, the disruption in routine, and, a lot of people, they had plans and they had events that they wanted to attend, right? And they haven't been able to do that. So it can be really like discouraging and like devastating for a lot of people when they're not able to, right? So it can be hard to see that like hope and optimism. But, as things start to get back to normal, which will take some time, of course, right? As people are getting vaccinated, and as restrictions will eventually loosen up, I think it's just kind of important to kind of take it one step at a time. And I think it's still important to plan for the future, right? So if there are things that you're looking forward to, please go ahead and like still think about those things. Are there trips that you want to take? Is there traveling that you want to do, right? Like, do you want to for like high school students or university students, right? Like, are you thinking of moving to another city for school? Or what are the plans? Like, what's moving forward? What do you want to do? It's important to just kind of have those goals in mind, and take like little steps to work towards them. And of course, like, some of those steps, they might take a little bit longer, because we're still kind of recovering from not recovering, we're still dealing with the pandemic, and as we move into recovery, right? So things will change. It's hard it's hard to be optimistic given all of the things that have happened, but we've seen from like historical events, like things will get better, and just kind of hold on to that.
Yeah, and I think for myself, and I'm just doing just self-reflection for myself, I think, this pandemic has really taught me the value of resiliency. And I think we all have become more resilient from this process. We're constantly learning to navigate new changes. And as we've talked about many times, that lack of stability and that inability to really plan things in the future. And I know Anmol discussed that, I think it's still good to like plan things in the future, but like a lot of those plans are really hard. Like I've had a number of friends of mine who've had to, completely readjust like their whole wedding plans, or move their entire wedding. So really, really huge, large milestones that people have. So and I think when we think about adolescence, I think this is really like our formative years of development. It's when we build our sense of identity, our sense of relationships with others, deciding on maybe a career path that we want to choose. So, already you're in this stage of a lot of uncertainty and like lack of stability baseline from all these changes. And then on top of that, you have a lot of the things that we take almost for granted, like just being able to go see, your grandparents, or to go see your friends. Now that is, or honestly, even getting a haircut. I don't even know what, like, suddenly I can't go get a haircut now because like the restrictions have come in place. So that's really hard. Like I know friends who are like, I used to get my hair done like every 3 months, and like it was like a self-care thing for them, and now they can't do that. But I think with that, we've also learned of other ways that we can engage in our own self-care. So one of my friends, for example, like keeps picking up new hobbies, like was starting to do like charcoal painting, or the people who've like gone more into baking. And I think we've kind of discovered that there are a lot of other ways that we can engage with ourselves, or other ways that we would have had the opportunity maybe to spend time doing that. We're having more opportunity that. I know that, I live at home. I actually I see my family a lot more now. Maybe I'm not having that same opportunity to see my friends. And I'm learning to find new ways to actually make sure I'm still interacting with my friends. Definitely like doing more Zoom calls, having Zoom game nights, And I think that has been really nice to see, okay, is there other ways that maybe I can still maintain these friendships? And, I think really interesting for my own life. I actually thought in many ways I got closer to some of my friends because I didn't have that opportunity to maybe interact with go to a large party and hang out with people in a large group. So I had to really key in on those select people in my life. And I think as a result, I think we've kind of bonded over this pandemic experience in many ways. So I think there is a lot to be said about human resiliency and our ability to really adapt to adversity. And I think a lot of us are doing this. And so I think we should really commend ourselves for that. And I do think there's hope. I think we are seeing with the vaccine that there is a reduction in cases, and as Prime Minister Trudeau says, we might have a one-dose summer, so maybe things will start to open up and get back to normal. And I think a lot of these lessons that we've learned from the pandemic, I think will streamline going forward too. I think we will learn to be more adaptable, more resilient, if we are placed in a situation where there is uncertainty, because we've dealt with it and we're dealing with it on a day-to-day basis.
And just based on what Raveen was saying earlier, I think one of the things that I've personally noticed is, people have really been brought together by this experience. So even people who don't have anything, who they don't think they have anything in common, this is that one common factor that's bringing everyone together. And even across social media, right? You're seeing a lot of people really coping with this using, humor, which is so important. It's like such a central human experience, right? A lot of people use humor to cope with, like the uncertainty and all of the stress that they are experiencing, right? So I think using that humor and connecting with each other based on this shared experience is something that has been shown. And moving forward, I think having that lighthearted approach, and sometimes it's hard, right? When things are not going according to plan, things are falling apart. When it seems like things are falling apart, can be really hard to find that humor. But some people do, and it's really great to see that like the memes, like the TikToks, all the reels and the videos that are coming up, right? It's amazing to see that people are adapting like that, and still being able to connect with other people using these kind of mediums, right?
And I also think that there's something to be said about it's okay to grieve. It's okay to be pissed off. It's okay to be like, this is horrible. This sucks. This, like across the world. And I think with this pandemic, a lot of people are dying, and we can see this in India right now with the situation of the pandemic. People are losing their loved ones by something that actually would have been quite preventable. And that is upsetting. And so I think give yourself that opportunity to really just grieve and to be this is not okay. And sometimes you don't need to be happy all the time. I think we really we have this almost this culture persona that we need to be happy all the time, that everything needs to be good. But it's okay to be the world is going through a hard time right now. And not only with COVID, I think, we're seeing that with a lot of, I think during this time, it's highlighted a lot of other movements and inequities that we see. We experienced the Black Lives Matter movement, the farmers' protest in India. So we're seeing a lot of these things that people have these day-to-day challenges outside of COVID, but just imagine that they're still on the streets protesting those things amidst a global pandemic. So just imagine that those challenges and struggles that they're facing day to day as well. And so I think, I think this really highlights to me as well is that I think a lot of us, and I think myself, I've been really privileged from, I would say, my entire life. And so to just see how, COVID is just one hindrance has affected our lives so negatively, but to really also take that moment to reflect on, the challenges maybe everybody faces day to day, those still exist for a lot of people. So, maybe see how in ways, once this pandemic has resolved or things that got better, like how can we go to like also supporting those communities going forward as well. So I think also to keep those things in mind, I think this pandemic in many ways has highlighted like a lot of social issues, not just infectious diseases. And I think that's been really interesting. I think it's given us a lot of time to reflect on a lot of the inequities in this world.
Yeah. I love that you brought up grief and loss, Raveen, because, when we often talk about grief and loss, it's related to death. But there are other things that can bring out that like grieving and that loss too, right? So not just loss of loved ones, right? A lot of people lost their jobs, right? They've been displaced from their homes, right? A loss of normalcy, right? That we've been talking about since we started. And again, like what Raveen said, so like no one person's experience has been the same, right? Some people are in like the dead center of like a lot of like humanitarian crises as well, right? So just respecting, I guess, like the differences and welcoming everyone's experiences and, understanding like that what they are going through and what we are going through, like it's okay if it's not the same, if our struggles are different than theirs, that's completely okay too, right? And just allowing, I guess, like each other the space and that opportunity to grieve our losses, but also celebrate some of our successes as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think despite the challenges, it is important to see all of the things we've learned, such as the social movements and all the things we are grateful for, right? And our privileges and everything. I think it's important to just reflect back on this. And in a few years, we're all going to be like, remember COVID? And it's just going to be this whole thing. We had this experience of learning and differences and challenges. But yeah, like you guys said, it's just making us resilient. And at the end of the day, we'll all be stronger after this. So thank you very much for answering all of those questions. But just before we leave, we did talk about some resources earlier, but are there other resources that people can access? And if so, where can they access them?
So in addition to the resources that Raveen already mentioned, one of the projects that have come out from SAYMH is called Voices. So this is a collaboration with pediatric and psychiatric physicians in Calgary. And this is for youth. And the team is organizing virtual events for now, just to keep everyone engaged and to address some of the mental health concerns that are on the rise and to provide that opportunity where you can be supported in your mental health and also form some healthy habits that would help you cope with some of these challenges. So more information about these events can be found on our Instagram. So that's SAYMH YYC, so SAYMH YYC. In addition to that, I think a couple of great local resources, in addition to Connecting that Raveen mentioned, is Carya. So Carya offers a lot of supports, not just for youth and adolescents, but also for their families. So if parents are looking for some supports and they're looking for something to do together, supports together, that is a great place to go as well. And I think Raveen mentioned 211. I think that's a great place to contact if you are looking for something specific, but you don't really know where to go. So it's a way to access like a resource directory, and you can talk to someone who has like listings available to them, and they can probably help you get connected to something that is based on like your needs and your specific circumstances.
In addition to what Anmol was saying as well, we do have a website as well for our organization. It's www.saymhyc.ca. So it's SAYMH and we have a lot of great resources and just a list of different resources as well. So as well, including the ones that Anmol has mentioned. So we have a tab that's child and youth counseling, but there's also resources for crisis support and just help modules as well. So I think that's a really great resource that you can access and we've compiled. And as well as Anmol mentioned, even our Instagram page, we do keep a lot of content about mental health and different mental health supports for various issues. So I think that's a really great place. And I think for us, like our goal of our organization is really to connect with youth. We're youth run, youth led. And so to be able to provide information about mental health resources through our Instagram page. So if you want just kind of some daily mental health knowledge and tips and resources, definitely please follow us on Instagram too.
So thank you for joining us, and I really hope that we'll get to speak to you again about another topic related to mental health.
Yeah, Amreet, it's been our pleasure, and it's been a great time talking to you about this. This is really important to talk about. Start that conversation early on about mental health. So yeah, thank you for having us, and you asked us really great questions.
Thank you so much, Amreet, as well for having us. And I want to say that Anmol and I are both just budding professionals in this field, and I think we do have the benefit of being more closer to recently having been youth. But I think there's a lot to learn from youth, and talking to them and hearing their own experiences, and knowing how we can best support it from themselves. So thank you for yourself for initiating this, and to be able to hear kind of some of your thoughts and experiences about how the pandemic has affected you as a youth. And I think we're really thankful that we had the opportunity to chat with you, because I think this is like an area that Amol and I both really care about.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our talk today. And for everyone watching us, thank you for your support. I hope you learned something new. And I'll see you next week on Gen Z Unfiltered. Until then, take care of your mental health and peace out.